Alright guys, so today we're going to be talking about chatterbaits. And chatterbait fishing. Mainly because this time of year is when I start throwing chatterbaits. Chatterbaits are very versatile baits. You can throw them almost any time of year, really. Very similar to the jig. I actually have chatterbaits in my jig box. I actually throw them in my jig box because I consider them like a chatterbait, also a vibrating jig is what they're called. And basically that's what they are. They're a jig with a blade on the front of it. If you look at it without the blade, it's a jig, but then they add the little blade on there. So it's a jig with a blade. And jigs are my personal, one of my favorite baits to fish. So when you add a blade on there, I mean, what can be, right? You think, when you look at a jig, they're my favorite baits to fish. And you'd think, you know, what can get better than the actual jig itself? And they said, well, adding a blade to it. So they added a blade, basically add a blade to a jig and make this vibrating jig or chatterbait. I actually don't fish them that much. Like you'd think, like I said, you'd think it'd make a jig better. But for me, I like the original jigs. But this thing, I mean, you can fish this thing in very different ways. I mean, you can take this thing and basically use it like a spinnerbait, throw it out there, chuck and winding. You can drag this on the bottom, like a regular jig, drag it across the bottom. You can reel it right under the surface and have fish wake on it, like topwater. They'll come up and they'll wake on it, and almost like a topwater bite. You can basically do whatever you want with this. It's almost like a spinnerbait. The difference between this and a spinnerbait, though, is that this is going to come through grass better, but not hard cover. Okay, so this can come through grass a lot better than a spinnerbait, but it's not going to come through hard cover as good. So these baits, they don't have a weed guard on them. And you can get some that have weed guards on them. But this is a Z-Man chatterbait. Leave a couple links down below to a couple chatterbaits that I fish. But like the Z-Man chatterbait's basically what I fish. And they don't have weed guards on them. And so what that does is it leaves this big open hook on there. So when you're coming across, when you're reeling it and you hit a log or a stick, right, piece of timber, what generally happens is that big old hook right there hangs up on it. It either rolls over and hooks it, or just somehow gets caught on it, but it's a big open hook. But where this bait shines is ripping through grass. This bait here will come through grass. I mean, the only other bait that comes through grass that's good is probably a lipless crankbait, where you can rip out of grass, right? And that's going to be actually the next video. But, so that's the other, I mean, it goes through grass really good. That's where I fish it. Like I said, I don't fish it. You'd think it would take over the jig, but for me it doesn't. For me, it's its own category. It's its own lure, and I personally fish it in the grass. When there's, grass lines, milfoil, whatever, I huck it up in there, reel it through, and rip it out of the grass. You basically just reel it, and you feel it get heavy. You feel it in the grass, and you just snap it out. Just give it a couple hard twitches, hard snaps, and it pops out of the grass. A lot of times, that is when you're going to get your bite. So we'll go into the rod right quick, because the rods are people have different opinions, just like crankbaits and everything else. People have their own opinions, but a lot of people like to fish, like if you look at Fluke Master, for instance, if you know who that is, he fishes them on a very soft rod. He fishes them like on a crankbait rod. He actually helped 13 Fishing design it's called a chatterbait and a crankbait rod. Is what it is. He basically fishes them on crankbait rods, and it's because they're a moving bait. Because when you're reeling it in, and the fish come up to hit it, if you pull it too fast, or you have that too fast of an action rod, it will rip the bait out of its mouth. It will come up, and the hook will, pull right out of its mouth before it has a chance to actually get it. And I agree to that to a point. But for me, a chatterbait also has not treble hooks. A crankbait has, treble hooks, lighter wire hooks. A chatterbait has a big old nasty single hook. Okay, it's basically like a jig body, like I said, right? So that hook on there, show you, is like a jig. So I use a heavier rod with this. I use a medium heavy or even maybe a heavy action rod. Because I throw this, like I said, for me, it's going to be in grass. And I want to be able to rip fish out of the grass when I hook them, and I want to be able to pop this out of the grass. And so for me, it's going to be the Dobyns Fury 704, what I fish my chatterbaits on right now. That may change, I don't know when, but it may change at some point. But for now, that's what I'm fishing on. And it's a heavy action rod by Dobyns. Put a link to chatterbaits. I put a link to the rod down below. But it's a heavier rod. It actually says heavy action on it, or heavy fast action. But the Dobyns Fury, in my mind, I did a review on them, and I don't know if I did that video yet or not, but at some point you'll see a video of a review on them. Anyway, what they are to me, the Dobyns Fury is actually a little bit softer of a rod than most. Like that rod says a heavy action rod, and I've said this many times in videos, but it says a heavy action rod, but it's compared to other medium heavies, it's actually lighter. I have an old Fenwick medium heavy, and that Dobyns heavy is lighter than that Fenwick medium heavy. So that just goes to show different brands are all over the place. But to me, it's a good chatterbait rod. And so I like a rod, like I said, a little bit stiffer, a little bit more power, because you got the jig hook on there, and you got to pop it through grass, rip it out of the grass. So I could throw them out there, like I said, running through the grass. You feel the grass. Now sometimes it can be hard. I see people do this a lot, where they think it's grass and they give it a pop and it ends up being a fish, and they end up like hooking a fish. And that can be kind of hard sometimes, because the grass is going to kind of be mushy and kind of load up your rod, just kind of have a little bend, just kind of slowly bend your rod over, be mushy. But sometimes that's what a bass, depending on, what mood they're in or whatnot, sometimes a bass can bite like that. Sometimes they can just be a really weird, mushy, finicky bite, and they're not just hammering it or, whatever. So sometimes it is hard to tell, but if you bought, the solution to that would probably be to buy like a super high quality, super expensive rod, like some like $500 rod, $600 rod, something like that. That might help out. But for me, that's not really an option. I'm around the $100 price point, that Dobyns Fury, $120. That's kind of my price point of rods right now. And so I can't afford to go buy a $600 rod. Maybe if I saved up a ton of money, I could. But for me, I'd rather go buy, for $600, I'd rather go buy, 4 or 5 Dobyns rods, Dobyns Fury, rather than that. Because that's a lot, you could have a lot of rods for one rod. Anyway, so for me, it's all just about, I'm going to tell you, hook sets, what I'm going to say is hook sets are free. That's all I got really to say. So if you have any thought that all of that could be a fish, set the hook. There's just no doubt. You don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, I think that's a fish, but whatever. You want to set the hook if you think it's a fish, right? And what it's going to do, if it's in the grass and you think it's a fish, but it's really grass, it's not going to hurt you. You're going to set it and it's just going to rip it out of the grass. But if it's not a fish, and you think that it's, or if it is a fish, and you're like, oh, I don't know if that's a fish, and you don't set the hook, you just keep reeling, they're not really going to hook up that great. So the chatterbait, I do for hook sets, I do kind of a hard sweep hook set. I don't jack them like super hard like a jig. I do a harder sweep, so I'll be reeling, and all of a sudden it will float up, or I feel a bite. I'll do like a harder sweep and reel. And then once I have them hooked, I may kind of pull on them hard, just to make sure that jig hook is in them. And then from that point, I'll crank them in the boat. I don't really fight them a whole lot, like you would on a crankbait or whatnot. They got that bigger hook on there. As long as the the blade and the snap, whatever, like this has a little snap on there, whatever components this has, as long as they're strong and they're good components, I'm going to set the hook and I'll drag that fish out of there. I'll use a little bit tighter drag and I'll crank the fish out of there, because once you got them stuck with that jig hook, you're good to go. You can grind them in. It's like just like a jig, right? That's how I see it anyway. So you're ripping it through the grass, you get a, you think you got a bite or whatever, do a sweeping hook set, you got them on, and then I just crank them out of the grass basically. So that's kind of how I do chatterbaits. For trailers on a chatterbait, I'm going to run swim baits most of the time. I run either a Kitech or that's the Strike King. I don't know, I forget what they call it, the Rage Swimmer. That's what this one is, Rage Swimmer. I actually dipped it in chartreuse, so it's a big chartreuse swim bait on the back of there. But I usually run swim baits. Depending on the color of my bait, usually I match it up. So like this is chartreuse and white, kind of this, right? So I have a chartreuse on there. If I had a white one, I'd probably throw a white swim bait on the back of it. And for colors on chatterbaits, it's really simple. I'm going to have usually chartreuse and white, usually like a brown or green pumpkin, more my bluegill, and then I'm going to have a white, a shad. So you have your kind of like big intrusive chartreuse color, which really doesn't imitate a whole lot, could imitate a bluegill, but who really knows. Then like a green pumpkin color, maybe with a green pumpkin trailer dipped in chartreuse, so it has a little chartreuse tail, your bluegill imitation. Then some kind of white for shad. Those are kind of the colors I do. And then maybe if you're imitating crawdad, like if you're popping it out of the grass, imitating crawfish, some kind of red and black would do you. But basically those are the colors I fish, just a few different colors. I don't go all crazy and buy every color on the market. I do have a black and blue as well. So I mean, you obviously you do need some colors. You do need, like black and blue, good for dirty water. Chartreuse, good for dirty water. And then your white and your green pumpkin, and then also a corral color. But other than that, other than those colors, you really don't need to, you really don't need to go buy a whole bunch of different random colors just for fun, unless you got the money, I guess. If you want, I mean, it's fun to buy stuff, so if you have the money to do it, then sure, go buy a ton of different colors. But really, those colors. And for the weight, I like to use 3/8 ounce usually. These are, I think all mine are 3/8 ounce. That's just a standard for me. I think they make 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce. But a 3/8 ounce for, 3 to 6 feet of water is going to be good for me. And so that's kind of what I got on chatterbaits, guys. This video is probably pretty long. Hopefully you guys maybe learned something about chatterbaits, maybe gave you some confidence or gave you some interest in chatterbaits. Go pick one up and go try it out if you haven't already. So thanks guys, thanks for watching, hopefully you enjoyed, and be sure to subscribe if you like my videos. I never really do this because I don't want to force people, I don't want to feel like I'm forcing people to subscribe, but if you like my videos, please hit the like button, please subscribe, comment down below if you want to see, if you have any video suggestions or you want to have any questions, anything like that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.